Hello, and welcome to part two of our reading, Peace Drums, Jesus Was a Hippie, by the one and only Joan Rivard. I reached out to Joan and asked permission to pursue this video series reading her book. And she got back to me. She invited me to a drum circle in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park. And then she invited me to a party afterwards. I didn't get to meet her at the park, but it was still such a lovely experience listening to the drums and hearing the people sing. And I went with a friend, so that just made the whole experience a lot better and overall more enjoyable. And then at the party, I got to meet her in person. The whole time, like, she was thanking me for promoting the book and for kind of like helping her spread the message of the book. Where, like, I thought, I'm the one that's honored. Like, I'm flattered, and I'm so grateful that, that she wrote this book, and that this book, led to this experience and to this moment and this environment that I'm trying to create with these videos. But overall, it was just so surreal, and it was so wonderful. And Joan, she's such a kind-hearted and beautiful soul, and I'm so grateful that I got to make that connection. And oh man, without further ado, let's get back into this reading. We left off on Constellations. It was the most beautiful tie-dye being sold on the Haight. The colors vibrated with rainbow lights. The rich, heavy cloth had complex patterns of starbursts and areas that looked like constellations in the universe. The cloth seemed alive and to flash and vibrate. It was hard to imagine how such amazing effects could be made with simple tie-dyeing, and it turned out that it wasn't the only method used. Some of it had actually been painted on by hand. And two icons, we have the cloud, the rainbow, and a palette, as well as some paintbrushes. The most gorgeous items in the Haight Street bazaar were on the deep turquoise background, Zema collection. There was something uplifting about the blue cloth and the electric rainbow patterns. So this actually reminds me of a episode on Love, Death, and Robots, which is kind of like the animated version of Black Mirror, and there's an episode called Zema Blue, and it's about like this basically robot that gains sentience and a conscience, and it became an artist. And it goes a lot deeper than that, obviously, but I wouldn't want to spoil it if you haven't watched it, but I recommend that episode. And it reminded me of this because the Zema collection, and then Zema Blue, and the blue cloth and the electric rainbow patterns. So that's a really interesting episode that I recommend. So moving on. There was something in it that spoke about liberty, maybe ecstasy. There were even political statements in it. Only someone who believes in freedom would wear these clothes. Only someone who has a positive view of mankind and a hope for the future would dress in rainbows. And the icons here is the globe. Icons of people, of social people and partners, I believe. And okay, and someone being wild and doing a cartwheel. I tried on a skirt, a top, a sort of long vest, and an intricately made long-sleeved jacket, all of the same material. The hems of each were uneven and fell in graceful layers one over the other. The skirt hung down in points, some parts shorter than others, so that I still wore a full dark blue skirt underneath that reached the ground. These clothes were made to make an ordinary woman feel and look like a queen, not a drone or a peon. That's another thing that's real political about them. And the icons there are a crown versus a bucket and no, I'm kidding, that's a broom. Looking in the mirror, I felt transformed. These clothes were not only comfortable, but also very flattering. They hid all the flaws in a woman's figure and directed attention toward her face. There was no forced display of sexuality in them. At the same time, they were deeply feminine. The cloth was heavy and seemed to embrace me. I could feel the weight of the rich layers flowing over me. This is what I wanted to be when I grew up. Looking back at me from the mirror was a person who was living what she believed in with confidence. As bright as tie-dye, as loud as peace drums, the ideals these clothes stand for are powerful. They're the same concept Jesus talked about when he said to love your neighbor as yourself. And this is a really great look into how important clothing is to the counterculture movement and to hippies all over, because counterculture is about straying away from what is normalized in society, and clothes were a huge factor in that. So this is beautiful. I had no choice but to put down a large sum of money. It was an investment in what I like to call the movement. That push for peace and civility and kindness that ignites millions around the globe. The golden rule screams out from the beautiful colors and images the peacemakers like to adorn themselves with. The Bill of Rights is evident in the loose, flowing styles that don't constrict like the establishment's manufactured clothing. And we have icons of, or that resemble or represent clothing. A swimsuit, heels, has a big X on it. And there's a ruler plus so it's kind of like the bill in and of itself, and then money, and that, it's okay to do that because you're breaking away. You're free in a sense of the manufactured clothing. America has a great resource and a great gift that it's not using. America has a great resource and a great gift that it's not using. Was that the next section? Oh, I believe so. America has a great resource and a great gift that it's not using. The long-haired pacifists and their culture are uniquely American. Much of the beautiful rock music about saving the world came from our own garage bands. The same concepts Jesus taught about love and forgiveness and cooperation fill up the travel-worn journals in the backpacks of the house-free youth. More than most people would ever imagine. The desire to make just laws and treat people with respect is at the heart of what could be called the consciousness. I struggle with that word. Consciousness movement. The notion that people should be free and not always hemmed in by artificial things is the same belief in the pursuit of happiness which the nation's founders embraced. And so these icons, you have lots of things that, allude to... Okay, so the backpack and the notebook, I was thinking more of like scholarly, academic. Then we have a scale, books, liberty, a notebook, the heart's key to excitement, to happiness, to love. How often have so many of the rich and poor, all races and different kinds of people, gotten together the way they do when it comes to this? We should be proud that this rare historical phenomena is happening so powerfully in our country, in our own people. The lurid media images put out to demonize them, the sleaze, are not them. The weird bands with mean faces, the emphasis on sex and things that most people aren't comfortable with, were added by others. The golden rule, plain and simple, is what these people are into. Negative propaganda about them is as different from who they are as Paul the Apostle's violent doctrines are different from what the Bible says Jesus taught. And so these icons here, I believe that's like a chapel. Is that a whip? The Pope's hat, a wolf, someone on a podium, and chains. So this is all kind of like I feel like, yeah, it's kind of representing the wolf among sheep, basically. And then it says versus the dove, the heart, and peace, which signify liberty and love and peace. It was those raised on the American dream at the time, with mostly secure families and homes, who'd had the confidence to advance such vital concepts. They were proposing that mankind should finally free itself from the kind of dominance imposed by alpha apes in the jungle. They were actually saying that people were made for better things than to go after each other's throats and scrape by just to survive. What Jesus taught, when looked at separately from what other Bible writers added to it, is merely the way civilized people behave. So we have icons that represent the wilderness. The volcano is kind of like chaos and, the fear that, it might erupt one day and destroy and ruin. And then a fist for fighting versus peace, education, triumph, and success. Dressed in all this, I walked out into Haight Street amid the tourists and the house free. I had not wanted to change out of the new clothes and had instead placed the ones I'd been wearing in the bag. Down the crowded sidewalk I moved, layers of rainbow cloth billowing the sails as I walked. The reaction to my clothes was instantaneous. Everyone smiled or flashed a peace sign as I went by. The tourists took pictures. These bright colors, the free flowing of the rich folds of cloth, meant something to them that moved them deeply. The closest thing to coming home. Many of the street kids haven't seen their families in a long time. In most cases, it's just because their families are too poor to take them in or don't have room. Many were foster kids. Their brothers of the road have become their family. I want to make the point that when I write kids in this book, I'm not referring to anyone underage. Most of the people who refer to themselves and others like them as kids are in their 20s or 30s or older. When writing about youth or young people, I include an elderly among us, who tend to be very young at heart. And I love that because at that event where she invited me to, I was dancing among people much older than me. And it was like, it didn't matter how old or how young we are or were. What mattered was that we were freaking dancing, and it was so amazing. It was so beautiful to witness and to be a part of that. It felt good, and it felt all the great words. Though nomadic, their informal networks stretch nationwide. They have their gatherings at music festivals and rock concerts, where most congregate in the parking lots and don't even buy a ticket to go into the show. Some of those events, which mostly include concert goers who are not nomads, but believe the same way, have a lot of the feel of the religious revivals of the 19th century. And so these icons reiterate that sense of revivalness, is that a word? And just being free. I'm going to associate that person or the icon of that person like doing a cartwheel as being wild and free. Golden Gate Park is one of their favorite stopping places because of the sweet feeling of community that exists there. This happens, of course, in other places, and in fact, it often happens almost any place where people gather in a friendly way. But there's something special about the way it happens here in the city that spawned the 60s peace movement. For some of these rootless nomads, coming here can be the closest thing to coming home. These are our own homeless children who ended up here when they had nowhere else to go. In getting to know them, I found that economic conditions, broken families, job loss, and high rents are the cause, not anything wrong with them. And so these icons here, this feels more of Joan's reaction to this, kind of like, what is going on? And then homes and fleeing, not fleeing from homes, but like the homes, they fled from them, essentially. Sitting on a log next to the tunnel can be for them almost like sitting on the couch in a familiar living room. Sunbathing on the grassy area below the Haight Street entrance to the park, called the Horseshoe, can feel like being in their old backyard if they close their eyes. The sound of the fountain at the pond can be reassuring and familiar. This is where old friends are reunited, or are heard about from others who've seen them on their travels. On these accustomed paths where music, pot, and stories are shared openly, friendships and romances are rekindled. I'm just sitting with that final paragraph. That's the imagery that she provides. It's beautiful. The drum circle. Walking into Golden Gate Park, I could already hear the drums. The rhythmic sound echoed all across the meadow where so much happened in the 60s and is still happening. Spectators watched as a motley group of about 24 drummers, some of them strangers who'd never made music together before, performed in perfect synchrony. They picked up on each other's signals like trained musicians with some inner unexplained communication. The people listening also seemed tuned into the same force that moved the drummer's hands. They too swayed and moved to the heartbeat sound. It was more than entertainment, more than art. The drummers were swept up by inner visions. 6 congas gleamed in the sun with their smooth fiberglass sides, and as many djembes, I don't know if I'm saying these words right, carved wooden drums. Okay, that's what that means. A man kept the strung rhythm on his gorgeous drum, its smooth white top tied to its base with strings of heaven blue. Another had a large bass drum that made a powerful sound. There was a double-headed drum placed on its side, struck with sticks on either end. Its ancient African design was held together with gleaming modern metal clasps. There were 2 snare drums on a stand that a Native American played, with drumsticks. A homeless man played a white plastic bucket. A beautiful, stately woman played an amazing drum that was painted rose and gold with swirls and butterflies and suns. She wore a dress with musical notes on it, silk flowers in her hair, and a small rhinestone tiara. Comfortably installed on the park bench that was the focal point of the circle, it was obvious that she was an important member of the group. She closed her eyes, her strong drum beats setting the rhythm of the circle. And so these icons, I believe, represent her and everything, going on around her, the drum circle. A young man struck with passion a drum he'd brought on a bicycle, carrying it on his back. Another beat furiously on a drum that was a work of art made of dark wood. It had cobalt blue strings and brass studs around the base, and a ring of what looked like carving around the bottom, but was actually a strip of recycled tire tread. It stood enthroned on a gleaming chrome stand where he played it standing up all day. His hands were so damaged from drumming that he wrapped them with white adhesive tape around both palms and thumbs and around 2 fingers on both hands. His hands were so damaged from drumming that he wrapped them with white adhesive tape around both palms and thumbs and around 2 fingers on both hands. That makes me think of how therapeutic music is to me. And I remember in high school when I would come home from working at Burger King, I'd be so beat. I'd be so tired and my feet were aching and my whole body was just tired. I felt drained. But as soon as I put music on and I just let myself go with the flow and get into the groove, all of that dissipated. And as long as I listened to the music and danced, I didn't feel anything but good. I didn't feel the pain, and I didn't feel the heavy weight of what it is to work. I just felt free, and it was like my safe space, my haven is what music provides to me. And so I loved reading this right now, that, you know, although it was damaging to him, like physically, emotionally, this person continued to do it because it probably made him forget the pain, in a sense. Not just the physical pain, but, you know, emotional too. Other instruments were brought, an electric keyboard that made the place sound like a church. There was a cowbell hit with the drumstick, and also 2 long horns about 6 feet long, which were actually didgeridoos, but which were fluted at one end, so they looked like the king of longhorns ancient religions used to call people to prayer. 2 men sitting on chairs blew into them with all their might, making an eerie, vibrant sound that was amplified with a portable amp. One horn of ebony wood was decorated with semi-precious stones. The other was made of what looked like horn, wrapped with gold bands around the base. The drummers played all day until their hands were raw, taking short breaks. They played into the sunset when it started to get really cold, their fingers numb. The young man packed up all his stuff and his big drum on the bicycle and started off across the field. But then, hearing some irresistible beat and unable to pull himself away, he came back. He unpacked everything that he'd just carefully arranged, the drum case, basket, and backpack in his folding stool, and set them up again, and joined the circle, like before. And so I'll end there. I don't know if I want to keep these videos very long, but that is what it feels like. Oh man, that's what it feels like to witness and be a part of a drum circle. And I love how Joan writes in that perspective, that we can actually sit with her and witness this beautiful moment in time and space. And again, I just want to reminisce and sit with that passage in the text where it talks about the drummer and the pain that he ultimately caused by playing the drums. But, you know, I feel like I would definitely overlook that sensation of beating on the drums and feeling the pain of that. I don't know what I'm saying. But music helps us in every which way. It brings us together and makes life so much better, I believe. Bye.